So I'd like to call a meeting to order. I see it's 7:01 according to my computer. And I believe that staff is going to take us through a few presentations and then questions and answers.
Yep.
Or hopefully answers.
That's correct. Do you want to adopt the agenda before we get into that?
That's a great point. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda as written?
I'll move the agenda as written.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, I guess, Amy, can you do a roll call vote for us?
Sure, I'll just go in the order that you're in on my screen. Manager Pedersen,
Here.
Manager Duval,
Here.
Manager Crafton,
Here.
Manager Cook,
Excuse me, what is the question?
So,
Adopt the agenda.
right, it looks like we're taking attendance too, though.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused why here would be the appropriate response. I'll go with yes.
All
very
right.
good. And President Ziegler.
I'll go with yes also. Does everyone understand we were actually voting to approve the agenda?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Mr. President,
So the agenda is approved.
Mr. President,
Manager Cook,
point of order. Again, I think we need to state that we're holding this via Zoom because of the abundance of caution because of the pandemic. Stating it in the notice, I don't believe is sufficient, and even if it would be sufficient, I think it's appropriate to state it so that if people ever come back to this, they know that why we're doing it by Zoom and cognizant of the fact that why we're doing it by Zoom.
okay, so we have it on record, your comments as you stated them. And yes, we're holding it remotely out of an abundance of caution because of COVID. Administrator Jeffrey, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. President Ziegler, managers, we have a few things. First of all, welcome to the first ever work session 23. We'll see if this works for us and if it makes our other meetings more efficient, and let's say you get more information in front of you. So as you're all aware, we've been talking for numerous years about everything from soil health to climate resiliency. We've done a number of different projects ourselves between our flood risk assessment mapping that we're doing with Bloomington and Minnetonka and Eden Prairie, hopefully with Chanhassen next, to some of the other discussions we've had around developments that have come in, and if there are opportunities to look at a more holistic approach to it. Other things that have been talked about though with the managers is partnerships and finding more ways to leverage what we do and assist others in doing that. So with that in mind, I've invited Hennepin County to share with us today. We have Eric Holthaus from, are you both from Environmental Services? No, you're from, yeah. They're both from Hennepin County, so we'll just go with that. And Karen Gallus invited them to speak tonight on the climate action plan that was developed. And Karen will focus, I believe, a little bit more on water resources and how that is coming out of the plan. So a lot of time for them, and then let questions be if they have them. But yeah, the objective is to find out what they're doing so that as we move forward with our planning efforts, we can dovetail as much as possible to find partnership opportunities. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Eric, if you'd like.
Yeah, awesome. Really nice to be invited to this. My name's Eric Holthaus, and I work as the Climate Administrative Manager for Hennepin County. I'll share my screen in just a moment, but I'll be transitioning. First, I'll be sharing sort of my portion from the relatively new Climate and Resiliency Department. I'll share sort of an overview on some of our climate and resiliency efforts across the county. And then I'll turn it over to Karen, who is in the Environment and Energy Department, and she'll give a kind of a deeper dive into some topics that might be more specifically of interest to you. But I hope that you find it all useful, kind of a decent overview, and I hope that we could have some good conversation and discussion. I think between the two of us, we'll take maybe 20 to 30 minutes for presentation, and then have maybe 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A, or however the agenda and the time allows. And so I'll share kind of the overview from my perspective. I'll share my screen in just a moment, but I started working for Hennepin County on August 29th. I moved here on August 25th. Prior to my role here with the county, I was serving as the city of Cedar Rapids in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as their sustainability program manager. And prior to that, I was doing similar work, both first as a recycling coordinator, then as a sustainability program manager for the University of Iowa, living in Iowa City. So my background, I grew up in Illinois, lived for a long time in Iowa, studied geography, studied urban planning. That is my background. And so excited to be here, just living north of Lake Nokomis and enjoying the cross-country skiing season. And I really love it up here. So you'll have a lot more information, I'm sure, about the area, and I'll be glad to learn as much as I can from you. But I'll go ahead and dig into the experience that I've been part of so far in my work and experience here at Hennepin County. Like I said, it's going on about 5 months now. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. One moment. Okay. Okay. All right. So presentation to the RPBCWD. We'll kick it off now. So the gist of what we'll go over, Karen will be able to introduce herself. I guess, Karen, do you want to just say hi now, just so I don't feel like you don't get to talk for like 20 minutes?
I'm so fine not talking for 20
Yeah.
minutes, but hi there. For those of you I haven't met before, my name is Karen Gallus. I work in the county's Environment and Energy Department, and I'm one of the supervisors in our Land and Water unit. So my sphere of influence includes our partnerships with watersheds, working with partners and residents of the county on stormwater and water quality best management practices, as well as habitat protection improvement, aquatic invasive species prevention, and a few other things as well. So I've been with the county for about 6 years, and was just starting around the time that you were completing your last comprehensive watershed management plan. So some of the very first meetings I went to in my role were TAC meetings at the old Riley Perg office. So excited to be here today.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Karen. Okay, we'll keep diving into it. So yeah, Climate and Resiliency Department. My name's Eric Holthouse, and our department's relatively new. In May 2021, the Board of Commissioners passed a climate action plan. And it's both very bold, and it's also similar to a lot of other climate action plans, at least in the scope. Reducing greenhouse gases 45% by 2030, net zero by 2050, pursuing resilience in the face of our growing climate hazards, both thinking about like acute hazards and also the chronic stressors that people face in the presence of different hazards like higher heat, flood events, et cetera. And to prioritize equity. And we'll talk more about that, but caring about equity through and through the work that we do. And so, you know, our department, like I said, my director, my boss, Deanna Chaman-Salas, she started here about 1.5 years ago in our new department. I was hired about 5 months ago. Around that same time, we hired 2 full-time community liaisons. Their specific role is to really engage, build relationships with the community, make a lot of the connections that we hope to make with lower income, BIPOC residents, people that don't speak English as a first language, maybe youth populations, more senior populations. Those are some of the people of interest that we want to make more connections with as time goes on. And so here's the kind of mission of our department: fostering climate change mitigation, that's reducing greenhouse gases, and adaptation, that's building resilience to our climate hazards and our varieties of stressors that we face here at Hennepin County that some people face disproportionately or just more so than others. And so this is just a quick overview of that as well. So we want to cut greenhouse gases preventing the problem from getting worse, and then adapting to climate change. I got to change my view here just a little bit. Adapting to climate change and preparing for the projected impacts. I'm going to go over a couple conditions here that help to kind of show where we're at and where we need to go. These numbers are a bit small, so I'll guide you a little bit here. We've had a greenhouse gas inventory that measures the nitrous oxide, the methane, the carbon dioxide that causes climate change, and that's been kept since 2005. It's Hennepin county-wide. That would include emissions that come from the power plants providing electricity and gas to homes and businesses and industry. It also includes vehicles that are powered by internal combustion engines. That's both on-road and also off-road. It includes methane emissions that come from landfilled waste. Well, those would be the primary components of it. And so what you see here is how our greenhouse gases have kind of moved over the years, and they've gone down. The grid is particularly responsible for that improvement. The grid's been getting greener. There's been more wind, there's been more solar power, but chiefly a whole lot of wind. And also buildings are more and more energy efficient as time goes on and technology improves and people make improvements in their homes. And so as you see here, this would be the one of our most recent then when the Climate Action Plan was made. So this would have been about 2019 when they started gathering this data. But this is kind of the inflection point, 2019. What do we need to do from here? Karen, I think, might spend a little bit of time on this as well, focusing on a particular piece of this wedge. This is called a wedge diagram. So you kind of look at business as usual scenarios and you look at the chunks of reduction in emissions that need to occur in commercial and industrial sectors, in residential sectors. These would be energy efficiency improvements. This is the electric grid mix right here, getting greener. This is electrifying buildings. So changing buildings that get natural gas for heat or other appliances, electrifying those. This is the improvement we need to make in reducing vehicle miles traveled, the amount of miles that we're traveling in our vehicles. It's Minneapolis is pretty dense. There's density in other parts of the county and some areas are more spread out. When you're more spread out, you're typically driving your car more. You probably have a larger house that's using more energy. And so there's a lot that can be accomplished with vehicle travel reduction. And that's going to be part of the scenario for going forward for how we achieve the results that we want to. And then these last couple pieces, low and zero emission vehicles, transitioning to hybrid and then fully electric as time goes on, and other alternative fuels that create low and no emissions. Waste reduction and diversion is a sliver here, and Karen's going to dig a lot more into carbon sequestration. So this is just to say that we have a lot of work to do. A lot of great progress has been made, and we've kind of identified here the areas that are important for improvements for achieving the greenhouse gas reduction goals that we have. This is just a quick summary of how we adapt to a changing climate. This was focused on mitigation, greenhouse gas emission mitigation. This is focused on adapting to a changing climate and building more resilience. We're focused on making sure our transportation systems and buildings are prepared to endure higher heat events, flooding events. We're making sure that the landscapes that we build and help incentivize others to build are capable of infiltrating water where it falls and trying to reduce runoff, trying to reduce impervious surfaces. We're working to make better use and reuse water where it falls. And a huge part of this, of course, is our natural areas and agricultural lands. We can capture a whole lot of carbon with healthier landscapes. And so that's going to be a big part of this journey as well. I want to dig into just a little bit. So there's kind of three conditions I'm going over: mitigation, resilience, and vulnerability and equity. So when we talk about caring about equity, a very useful tool from the CDC is the Social Vulnerability Index. And this also has a component here laid over that includes climate vulnerability. So just on the social vulnerability index side, the CDC, according to different census tracts, can measure the population's language acquisition. Do they speak English? Do they speak other languages? Race, income. They can measure a variety of just different demographic and socioeconomic indicators. And so this lets us help see where we can try to encourage more of our efforts or make more efforts in these areas that have the highest vulnerability. Without a lot of discretionary income, you might really struggle if there's a major flooding event. You may not have the ability to go stay in a hotel or drive out of town to go stay with a friend. If it's really, really hot out and you don't make much money and you have to take the bus to get to work, it's going to be really challenging for you to perhaps wait for the bus, take the bus. Maybe you're doing a job that's outside in the heat. Maybe you go home and your home doesn't have air conditioning. These are some of the reasons why we're trying to focus on more vulnerable residents, because they'll be more disproportionately impacted by the changing climate. And to say are already, of course, impacted. So we have a lot of work to do. Just without a climate disaster specifically, a lot of people endure these chronic stressors. And so these are the residents that we're working to prioritize. So of course, with the more resilient and equitable Hennepin County, as a resident says, climate change is intersectional. Climate change burdens are racial and class discrimination burdens. It's all connected. It's important to make space and time for those most impacted along with the experts. So we've divided as far as an implementation strategy for our department, working across other departments in the county and working with the community, these 7 foundational strategies. I'm going to go over some examples in each of these different areas, and I think I might just speed up a little bit just so we can get to all the content. So the next slides are going to go over examples of progress in each of these 7 different areas. So the first of the 7 is strengthening individual and community resilience. And so just a few different ways that we're working to do that. We have a really productive relationship with the university and are starting to build urban agriculture and community gardening plots around the county in that partnership. We have a lot of work right now where we're working to make a resource hub. So as a resident in the future, you could put in your address and you could see where's an emergency shelter closest to me? Where could I access energy assistance and resources? Where could I access healthy food or multi-mobility or different mobility options? That's a work in progress. And also working with our emergency management department, they're starting to spread more and more of these mesonet units, which measure air quality and can help communicate different weather disasters in a much more precise scale than they used to be able to. Foundational strategy 2 is really focused on transportation emission reductions. Here at the county by 2025, about half of our fleet of 700 vehicles will be either hybrid or electric. So already we have, I think, 50 to 80 hybrid and electric vehicles. By the year 2025, we'll have 80 hybrids and nearly 50 electrics, and then by fully electric. And then by 2030, we'll be well over half, nearly 400 of our vehicles will be both hybrid and electric. And so we're working to create a fully hybrid and electric fleet. So already we have EV charging stations at some of our county facilities, and we're working with the community as well. We got a grant from the Department of Energy, Hennepin County, along with Great Plains Institute, Clean Cities, along with Minneapolis and Brooklyn Park. We're working to create a model for transportation emission reductions along with these more vulnerable residents in those cities. And then we'll work to spread those priorities across the across the county. And then ideally be in a really good position to apply for much of this federal funding that's coming down to support these efforts. This shows some of the information that I was just describing with about we're already almost up to 100 hybrids and electrics. We'll have many more by 2025. And so this is kind of the progression that you can see for our transitions to low and no emission vehicles. We're also working to prevent food waste and diverting organics from the trash. There's a lot of extraordinary work that Environment and Energy has been doing in the waste and recycling division. One of the big things to know is that if you're part of an organization that's very interested in applying for money to improve recycling or composting infrastructure, they have a lot of grants to support that type of work. So keep that in mind, and you can find out about those opportunities at the Hennepin County Environment and Energy website. We're also transitioning, of course, to renewable energy and reducing our energy use overall. You can see the emission reductions occurring over the past 7 years. Internally, our goal is to reduce energy use by 3% every single year. And then we also want to use carbon-free electricity for county operations by 2035. And so decreasing the heat island effect, especially in areas with the highest vulnerability. So a couple of these items focused on here. We're working to achieve our 1 million tree goal across the county. We're about a quarter of the way there. And we're also working with the Department of Corrections on their previously incarcerated residents to get job training and get into career pathways in both forestry and construction, and a lot of different areas. So this is just a small example of how we're working to combine green jobs and careers with those more vulnerable or those that face higher barriers to entry in the job market. Just to show here, we're certainly part of many partnerships at both local and regional and state levels. And then this is just a glimpse now, as you can see, just another shot at our greenhouse gas emission reductions. Sort of a jump from the last slide, but this is the amount that's been achieved really without any specific climate action efforts from the county. So we did not exist in 2020. This department did not exist, is what I mean by that. And from 2010 to 2020, there was a 28% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions at the county. Without doing anything at all, our goal is to get to 45% reduction by 2030. And with just business as usual, as the grid gets greener, we would potentially be at 41% if the improvements just keep getting made in energy efficiency and in renewable energy. And so, of course, as a department, we've got many missions to achieve, and we certainly hope that we can add an additional 4 points here to achieve that goal. And so just to recap, some of the priorities are maybe a recap, and also saying what our intentions are for 2023, more specifically. We're building out our community engagement strategy. And so we'll be doing a lot of engagement in different districts across the county to really understand what lifelines do people need, where do they access them, and can we help support this concept of resilience hubs, helping to enhance community centers so that they can be shelters in times of disaster. People can achieve healthy food at them. They can access different modes of mobility at them. So strength and resilience is a huge part of our work right now. Reducing transportation emissions is a huge part of our work. I mentioned the project with the Department of Energy. We're working with Brooklyn Park and Minneapolis to develop a model to reduce transportation emissions. We also have goals as a county to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 20% in the county, and that's a really big goal as well. That's by 2040, I believe. So that'll be a big thing to achieve. And that's one of our primary goals right now, working on policies around that. And then the other aspect that we're spending a lot of time on as a department is working toward the 1 million tree goal, and also working on an urban ag and food security plan. So I'm going to transition now to Karen.
Awesome. Eric, do you want me to take over slides, or are you okay helping me out there?
How about, well, if it's a quick transition, maybe you just do it and you can have a little bit more easier time perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bear with us here for a second, y'all. Oops, but I'm, I guess it started me over at the beginning though, so sorry about that.
I can restate all my slides.
Yeah, everybody.
It was a good presentation.
All right, we're back in business now. Thank you. So I thought a little bit about wanting to share some of the thinking I've been doing as a water resource manager with you all in terms of what roles that I think water resource managers do or could or really, should have in galvanizing and supporting climate policy and actions. And I'm going to share a lot about some of the ways that we're thinking about this and what we're doing, but I hope you don't mind. I know some of your work well enough that I went and grabbed some information from your website over the last few days too, to kind of like show you how I see all the puzzle pieces fitting together and just highlight some of the really excellent work that you're already doing on these topics, which I suspect you know. But I think the first kind of insight I've had related to this is that, especially in natural resources and water resources fields, we have a really tremendous thing to offer, which is mission, history, and experience. Like, I think it's really scary sometimes to have a big brand new plan or topic area. And I know that as we completed the climate action plan for Hennepin County, there were feeling like everybody's work had all of a sudden doubled or tripled. But in natural resources in particular, all of our work has always been about climate change, even if that's not how we have thought about it in the past. And I think that's just as true in water resources work, and in particular for watershed districts and watershed management organizations as well. So that's something I really wanted to highlight here. We all in these fields, and you in particular as a watershed district, have like very rich mission, history, experience, ongoing work to leverage in this space. And the urgency of the crisis and just needing to get going, I think really demands that we figure out ways to get going. And so being able to ramp up or leverage existing processes, programs, funding streams to do work maybe slightly differently or just think about it differently as climate work is a huge opportunity to get some momentum and wins in this space. So one of the ways that we're doing that at the county, I'm just going to throughout here highlight a few strategies and actions from our climate plan and talk about how that is looking and playing out in our work, and then show you some things that will feel familiar. But one of the strategies in our plan is to plan for and mitigate anticipated ecosystem and open space impacts. And particular germane to this audience, one of the things that the plan acknowledges is that responses to climate change should not exacerbate water quality problems downstream. And especially as water resource managers, we know that those are two quite difficult things to balance. The other strategy and action I wanted to highlight here before I get to kind of an example of how this is playing out in our work is our plan also directs us to reassess policies and practices to manage increased stormwater. So look towards designing projects to manage flows from those mid-century rainfalls that are, already increased now and only going to continue increasing. We also direct ourselves to reduce volume of and pollutant load in stormwater runoff, and to protect and restore streams, wetlands, floodplains, and uplands. So one example that I wanted to highlight, and there are a couple of others that I don't have visuals for, but this, what you see on the right here is some master planning work that we were working on with a watershed partner, with a city partner, before we started working on climate planning. And we were thinking of this as a water quality project, but it is very much also a climate project. The master plan design that was identified here in partnership with our watershed partner, with our city partner, and with the residents. This is an area that is in the process of developing and transitioning land use. Identified several areas to do wetland restorations, store water, restore habitat, all of these things that will, without a doubt, improve downstream water quality, but they will also absolutely make all of us and the people living in this area much more resilient to climate change in the future. because kind of midstream in the project, we were also able to ask the consultant working on it to say like, hey, can you look at some of those bigger projected rainfalls and talk to us about, you know, will there be capacity in these ponds to handle those sorts of larger projected storms? And so we were able to talk about and engage the residents who are participating in this on those topics as well. The other kind of neat part of this project, it is not as climate related, but comes back to a point I'll make a little bit later on, which is this is an area that was subdividing. So we had an opportunity to do something cool here because like the ownership was changing, but there were going to be more property lines, so it was going to be harder to do something because we're dealing with more people. And so we took this kind of neat approach to do an overall master plan, but then divide out individual parcel plans for people too. So what you see here on the left is one of the individual parcels that had been divided. And then so we were able to show these new neighbors who all would need to participate in order to do some of these climate resilience features that would protect people from flooding and improve downstream water quality, and what it would mean for each individual, as well as what it would mean collectively to be able to move forward on a project like this. So I think this is just a cool example of something that we were already working on, but that we were able to pivot and like very easily turn into something that we think of as a really strong climate project, or the way we might approach planning for and adapting to climate change in the future, even though it wasn't initially conceived of in that way. The other kind of item that I pulled here, going back to that idea of balancing increasing rainfall and water quality, I never looked at the history section of your watershed district website before, so I read some about that earlier this week. But just kind of screenshotted here that in 1968, a group of people petitioned to form your district because they wanted to protect their communities from flooding. They wanted to manage water quality and restore natural areas. So you know your history better than me, but like you all have been doing this work since 1968. And so many people are just coming around to it now because they're realizing that they need to think about and balance all of these things. So please don't ever underestimate what you as individuals and as an organization have to offer in terms of helping us navigate through this world where we're going to have to figure out how to manage more rainfall. And we also don't want to compromise the amazing things we've been able to achieve on water quality in the last 50 years. And I think watershed districts are going to be at the leading edge of figuring out how to do that and helping us kind of figure it out with the expertise you've built at it over the last 50 years. So the second main point is that, especially as water resource managers, I think it's really important that we are the people who are advancing natural systems and green infrastructure as solutions that achieve water quality goals and deliver climate resilience. And this is really hard, but again, organizations like yours and the people who I work with have been doing this for quite some time, and we have some things to offer here. Another action from our climate plan that I wanted to highlight, protecting, restore, and connect streams, wetlands, floodplains that can help manage stormwater and mitigate flooding. I didn't have a great visual on this one. It kind of just looks like a pretty wetland picture again, but this is actually a photo of property in Independence. I don't have very many good visuals of the work that we do in like built environments. I'm sorry, I'm a sucker for the fall leaves and the wetlands and those sorts of things, but I'll talk about some of that work too. But this is a horse boarding facility that during the very, very wet years that we had from 2000, and they're at the kind of very bottom of their watershed. And they have a partially drained wetland and they're trying to graze horses. And they have I lost my train of thought. During the very, very wet years we had from about 2014 to 2020, this partially drained wetland, which for most of the time they'd owned the property, had been mostly dry, became what they referred to as Lake Zura. It was just like wet, and it really compromised their business. They were operating in the red because they weren't able to graze in areas they previously had been, and they were feeding a ton of hay, and it just wasn't working. And this is actually a nonprofit facility that raises money for Shriners Children's Hospitals. And so it was like a very sad thing that they weren't making money. So one of the things that we're doing is working with them and neighbors all around them, upstream and downstream, both to try to figure out how to like provide them the drainage that they need in order to operate their business profitably, but also under most circumstances, retain more water in their lake wetland than they had in the past, but will be able to give them a predictable level of water. And that's what they really need for their business. So we're storing more water than we might have in 2010, 2000 on the regular. But when it's raining and raining and raining and raining, they have an overflow, so they can still depend on the grazing area that they really need to operate their business. So I think those are the kind of like flexible solutions that we need to be thinking through in order to balance that water quality and flood storage thing, but also like really advance the idea that like natural systems can do this for us. We don't need it all to be in concrete channels and pipes. The fun example I found from your project page, I just thought this was like an excellent graphic representation of exactly what we need to kind of be explaining to people in terms of how natural systems can do for us what we need to survive without, we need to be able to work with them. So I loved the, I loved the progression that your district showed from years ago to now, and the difference between such a heavily incised channel to something that actually like a creek that does have connection to its floodplain, and what that can do to protect us from catastrophes. So just wanted to, another kudos for y'all. Eric mentioned a little bit that we have carbon sequestration goals as well. And that's for us, that is a county-wide, our county residents sequester carbon. We're trying to get to net zero by 2050 county-wide, not only in county operations. And a big part of that, like we cannot do that alone. So we work with residents wishing to sequester carbon. And I think, yeah, this is where I'm come back to the wedge diagram that Eric showed you a little bit earlier, but this last wedge down here is the carbon sequestration wedge. And we can't get there without putting more carbon in the soils, without planting more trees, without planting more prairie. And all of those things are also very, very good for stormwater management because they soak up and transpire the water and it never gets to the stream. And that's all very good for flood mitigation and prevention, because the water that doesn't get to the stream because it was soaked up by the tree does not end up pooling in a place where we don't want it pooling and impacting vulnerable people. So I mentioned, I didn't mention actually our climate, some of the other sequestration things that we're working on. Eric mentioned the 1 million tree goal that we've set at the county. The other area where we're really ramping up work here is related to conservation easements. We had, which is a tool for protecting habitat and protecting land from conversion. And by placing an easement on a place that could accommodate more trees or more prairie or more soil carbon, we're really working towards that sequestration goal and that overall net zero by 2050 goal. And like everything else, just I was not aware that you all operated a gravel bed nursery this past year, but this is super cool. And I'm excited to connect you with our forestry team about the work that they're doing in the Million Tree Goal. They'll be, I don't know if you've already connected with them, but they'll be excited to hear that you've got this going on. To be, and something that is really kind of fairly new to me and us at the county, but when we're planning and prioritizing natural systems and green infrastructure that deliver climate resilience, I think one of the things that we really could do, this is another one of those kind of not easy necessarily, but tweaks that you can make to existing programs and existing processes to consider vulnerable populations when you're planning your projects and planning the investments. Another one of the strategies in our climate plan is to mitigate the disproportionate impacts associated with climate change. I think Eric spoke to this really well, so I won't belabor the point. But in particular, when it comes to flooding, this particular action that's in our plan really emphasizes the individual resilience of sump pumps and the landscaping to redirect water, but water resource managers know how to place projects that can prevent flooding from happening in the first place. And there isn't always a solution like that, but we should be challenging ourselves to look for the things that we can do to prevent and mitigate the flooding from happening in the first place so that vulnerable populations don't need sump pumps and landscaping to redirect water away from structures. I know that project planning that you go through is extremely rigorous, and there's a sustainability element to that. And I know that there is like a human kind of quality of life element to some of your project planning and evaluation processes. But one thing that we've been doing at the county is taking the population vulnerability composite score that Eric showed earlier and just kind of putting our projects on top of that and looking at how the investments that we make stack up against the people who probably need those investments the most, and what we can do to kind of transition and redirect some of that investment and effort over time so that we are really making sure that the people who are benefiting from the work that we do are the people who need it the most. And there's, I don't know exactly where the Pioneer Trail Wetland Restoration Project is. I was gonna like look that up today and I didn't quite have time, but that's just another one of those projects where like, you know how to do this, you've acquired the land, you did the project, there's water stored there, and there are flood mitigation impacts to that. Like, you know how to do those projects, and it wouldn't be that hard to like ask yourself the question, like, can we figure out how to do a project like that that would protect vulnerable people in our district? My last two kind of notes are short, and I don't think I have any visuals associated with them, but another thing that I've noticed over the last few years is that something that people in our field really have to bring to this topic is that we tend to be pretty good systems thinkers and already pretty good at thinking across jurisdictions and property lines and at the watershed scale instead of the like city boundary scale. And that's, it's hard to really realize that that's not something that a lot of people in other fields are comfortable doing, but they're not. And climate change really needs those skills bad. And so I think that offering to convene, offering to facilitate, offering to like help people work across jurisdictions, and just generally sharing systems thinking skills when climate problems need a climate solution is something that we in our water resources field can really bring to the table. One just quick example I'll share related to that is there's an area just west of downtown Minneapolis where it's a very well connected to transit, very close to downtown and lots of job opportunities, and is really ripe for redevelopment accept that it's a floodplain and the soils are terrible and it's really hard and expensive to build anything there. So many people who are desiring to put affordable housing in that area have just struggled to do it for decades. And for the past year or so, maybe more than that, I've been convening a working group at the county around flooding vulnerabilities and how to address some of these kind of multi-jurisdictional, cross-jurisdictional issues. And it has turned out to be a working group that is mostly about housing and economic development. And that is absolutely not my skill set. But I see that this crew needs someone to keep it moving, that can see the whole picture and figure out how to put it together. And that's a place where I've kind of seen that, like, nope, it's not my comfort area, it's not my expertise, but I can handle this complexity, and I can keep it moving. And so that's a service that I'm going to provide. That kind of brings me to my very last point, is that I think more than anything, in terms of supporting climate policy and action, we need to be talking to each other and need to provide the partnership. I think there are several things on the list of things we're going to need to figure out that, like, none of us can figure out alone. Most of all, how in the heck we can accommodate those mid-century projections and start building to them without putting all of our local partners in a completely untenable position. And if we're going to be advancing green infrastructure as a solution, like, how are we going to take care of that? And those are all really big questions. And I certainly don't have the answer, and I know that you don't have the answer either, but I think we all need to be talking about it in order to get to the answer. So I think that's all. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's all I had for you. Thanks so much for having us, and we'd be excited to take some questions or just kind of chat and discuss with you all too, if you have the time.
President Ziegler?
Yes, Manager
Yeah,
Craftsman.
so I just wanted to make a few comments, but Karen, I'm so glad you're here, you and Eric both. I've been wanting this to happen for a long time and realizing we really need to be partnering with the city or with the county so much, and that there are opportunities. And I think the challenges of climate change are accelerating this, but we've been talking about the need for more easements and that kind of thing too. And we've talked for over a year at least on how can we reach out to vulnerable populations? Who do we connect with? How do we find people and opportunities? Can we be doing more community gardens? What can we do? So it looks like there's a lot of potential for us to be talking to you about that and finding ways and finding people that might be able to connect us better to do those things. But I'm really excited about everything you've said tonight, both of you. I'm just so glad you're here. So start this process.
President Ziegler,
Yes,
this is Manager Cook. First of all, I'd like to thank both of you for your presentation. Appreciate learning more about Hennepin County's climate action plan. You give us a lot of things to think about, and I would ask it be possible for you to provide us with the slide deck so we could go back to them and review the questions. And you know, there's obviously some differences between Hennepin County and Carver County. There's a lot of similarities, of course, but I worked for decades downtown. One thing that always struck me is the density, you know, at least of the Minneapolis area, you know, even the 494 corridor, now the, you know, the 694 corridor. I don't even know if the 610 corridors in Hennepin County is in another county maybe, but my point is that, you know, there's a lot of industrial density, and I'm sure you've given plenty of thought about the fact of all of the square footage of roof spaces that exists. And I think there's a tremendous amount of favorable climate impact that could be done by marshaling those rooftops throughout the Hennepin County. But I just mentioned 4 areas that it is. And if you ever want to go down, you can go to the any one of the taller buildings downtown and take a look, and you can see all of the space that could be used for positive climate change in more ways than one. And the others, so just the rooftops could be green rooftops, solar panels, just reflective coatings, just one of those things. And with the ability of the county to impose zoning, building, remodeling requirements, I think, those items of positive climate actions having to do with these buildings should be included. And 2 other things I note, been to Arizona shelters are getting to be a lot of parking is being covered parking with solar panels. Unfortunately, Arizona has a problem in that the utility down there basically controls everything. And you can read about it and you don't have to go into that. So it makes it very difficult in Arizona to have a lot of pro-climate energy policies. But that said, I think that we take some lessons and apply them to Minnesota, but particularly Hennepin County. I know our problem is we have snow in the winter, as evidenced by our months of January and December. But we do have a summer, and opportunities to generate electricity without burning carbon. And on that note, so before I forget it, I'm going to assume, and if I'm not correct, I hope it's incorporated the fact that, you can go green, with electric cars, et cetera, but if the electricity being generated is not green, we need to take that into account in our measurements. And I have a client of mine who's been in transportation for probably 60 years. He recently told me that the energy utilities said that there's no way that they could convert to electric vehicles, be it trucks or cars. There simply isn't enough electrical generation capacity in the state yet. So that should be something that should be focused on. How do we generate that electricity? And I don't know that we're going to be able to do it with wind farms and solar alone, but if you don't try, you don't get there on that basis. So, and then my last comment, it mentioned about trees. And so we're out here, and as you go downtown, there's so many areas along major freeways, et cetera, that don't have trees. And, I don't know a reason why not. The leaves fall off, so you don't have the snow issue, on that basis. They're great for sucking up moisture and aspiration. Besides taking carbon out, they store it a long period of time, where if you got grasses, et cetera, they die, they decompose, they add carbon, et cetera, right back into the atmosphere when they decompose. In fact, I've read where the decompensation of organics is a significant issue. You already mentioned the waste products, but that's a big thing. So I think 1 million trees probably should be 2 million or more, and there's lots of areas to put them in. Maybe your limitation is funding, but I think that's a great thing to look at along the freeways. And like I said, for decades, I frequented way too many of those freeways, so I highly recommend that being considered on that basis. And then the last item I have, I noted you mentioned about conservation easements, et cetera. And maybe you know, or maybe you don't know, there's a area in Eden Prairie, I believe it's referred to as the Noble Hills area, which has had some contention, but at least in my view, that would be a property right for some type of conservation easement project, working with the current landowners, other conservancy districts, I think basically to end up at least buying a good portion of that property, limit the amount of development, and be able to help the county, succeed in its goals. So I'll point that out. You can learn more about that that project. I think that's singularly a conservation effort that's just waiting to happen, needs to happen.
Is that I do remember there being some amount of kerfuffle related to a former tree farm that was going to get developed upstream of the spring. Are we talking about the same thing?
That, yes, you're
Okay.
talking about, that's exactly the
Okay.
same property. Besides that, there's arguably flora and fauna, etc. Maybe even Native American, etc.
Sure,
But
yeah.
it just strikes me as might be a potentially very good target for your conservation easements and other work that you have done. But then again, just thank you for your presentation. It's very informative. We can get those slide decks. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Karen, I have a question for you. We kind of struggle a little bit with carbon sequestration, and obviously no two forests or no two wetlands or no two prairies are alike, but do you have any resource material on, what we should be promoting? Do we have an option to go one way or the other?
So if you're only thinking about the carbon storage, which is not what I would recommend, is the headline. Like think about lots of benefits. But if you're only thinking about the carbon storage, dense, well-managed hardwood forest is going to be the thing that is capable of storing the most carbon. That being said, the approach that we take at the county is to consider whatever piece of property or parcel that we're considering doing kind of restoration work or management work on wants to be, which sounds a little bit fluffy, but historically everything was, something. And it was that thing for lots of reasons. It was that thing because of the amount of sunlight it got, the amount of water it got, the types of soils it had. All of those things contributed to whether it was at one time a forest or a prairie or a wetland or a savanna. And so though in most cases, those conditions haven't changed, even though we have messed with the vegetation. And so the thing that will be most successful long run is to, if possible, kind of transition something back in the direction that it wants to go. The other really important consideration there is that for us, we are almost always working with a private landowner. We're not working on our own piece of property. And so I'm not sure if that's something that the district does or not, or I know you have grant programs and those sorts of things. Like the person who owns the property is going to have opinions, they're going to have the things they like. So, there's a project that we're working on right now that with a landowner who really, really loves bobolinks. That's her reason for having property and living where she does. Her property wants to be a forest, but we placed an easement on that property and she wants bobolink habitat. And so that's what we're going to give her, because that's the only option. But right now it's a hay field. So we're going to work with her to kind of turn that into more of a savanna with deep rooted grasses and above ground biomass and below ground biomass, and something that will really accumulate a bunch of carbon in the soils. And there's going to be a great carbon sequestration benefit to that project. But that's kind of just what, that's what we have to do there because we need the bobolinks. So I'm not sure, I don't know if that kind of gets at your question, but yeah, I guess overall, you have to be practical about what's possible on your site. And that includes both what the owner of it wants for it, but also what the conditions, meaning the sunlight, the water, the soils, the aspect, will really support.
Thank you.
President Ziegler, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, Manager Pedersen.
So firstly, do we have an overlay of the vulnerable areas map that we could sort of put on top of the district? I've never actually seen what that looks like in our district. We've all just sort of guessed randomly, I think, at it.
We do have it. We actually have access to it, and it is the area that is basically surrounding the Eden Prairie Mall, all of those apartment complexes, everything there. So
Huh.
we do have it as part of our DEI initiative. We grabbed that and started looking at it. So
One of the things I thought of right off the bat is we have this grant program to help people. Maybe we end up giving those vulnerable areas more of a score when when things come to us for applications, that they get a little bit more of a score so that we can actually put dollars where they're more vulnerable. I know that at one time, Hennepin County had the Lawns to Legumes program. Is that gone? I know it kind of keeps once a year. If you've already applied, you get $300 or something, but I mean, that's the same idea. Is it still around?
It's actually operated by the state of Minnesota, and I believe it is still around, and they are asking for an increase in funding availability this legislative session. But it's been very, very popular. I'd be surprised if it disappeared.
they turned me down twice.
Same.
Yeah, they've turned me down for the last like 5 years. So every person I've ever sent to them, but hey, keep trying. So another question I have for you is there any way that we could work with you on what grants you might have available, just so that we could either promote them to our residents, or we see what's there, so that if we have a project in mind or we see something we know it can kind of fit? Do you have some sort of a list or something for us to?
Yeah, we actually have a list of every grant program that we offer in the Environment and Energy Department. I'm not sure if we have that countywide, but at least that covers our kind of water and natural resources grants, and like tree planting grants and waste reduction grants and those sorts of things. And I can absolutely share that.
That would be super.
Yeah.
I think those are the biggest questions I had. I like Manager Cook, immediately thought about the Frederick Miller Springs project. That would be something that I think we need multiple partners to make something like that happen. It's not going to be just one or two of us. It's got to be a whole group of us coming up with dollars to, it's the last spring in the metropolitan area. It's the last one. There aren't any more. So that would be a great project.
I'll check with our Habitat team to see if it's hard for me to believe that nobody's reached out about that. Like, I know I responded to at least a few people asking if there wasn't anything somehow we could do many years ago at this point. I'll check in with our Habitat team to see if that's come up for them in their kind of project evaluation.
I mean, I also thought, okay, well, we need to replace vehicles now. We've got to go toward a hybrid or electric vehicle. I mean, for our district, that's a slam dunk thing we could easily do. We've also talked about potentially looking at a piece of property on Duck Lake, which if we moved our office there, we could set up educational areas of best management practices, but also set up like a community garden there where, maybe the vulnerable populations can come and plant and sort of get something not too terribly far away. So, I mean, there's lots of things, I think, right off the bat, low-hanging fruit we could probably do. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming. I think it was excellent to have you here.
Thank you.
Manager Duval, you haven't said anything.
Well, I've been waiting in my queue here. I have a question for either, and it's probably more for Eric question based on what you were talking about and kind of a higher level. talking about climate change and resiliency. They interact and deal with everything that we've been talking about here. I'm just, and you had the chart that showed, the wedge chart that showed going through 2020 or developed maybe in 2019. I'm just wondering if anybody is thinking or talking about, well, everything we're talking about here relates to big populations in our particular area, the metro area, and the changes that are going on. So if one thing is being developed, it's causing some other impact relating to water or other issues. I'm just wondering, with COVID still hanging around, and I have been reading a lot of stories about Minneapolis and St. Paul, where they're at like 50 or 60% of their retail commercial capacity. And I know we live along the light rail line going from downtown out to Eden Prairie. And I'm just curious if either of you have had any discussions at all, or anybody's dealing with any long-term impacts of what that might mean relating to planning and dealing with how population moves and interacts with all the stuff we're doing.
Yeah. Tom, I guess my response might be a little bit underwhelming because I personally have not been involved in many conversations like that. The building that I work in, barely, the government center downtown, the 25-story building, I know a lot of that space is now being leased out to a lot of different companies and organizations, and the building across the street as well that the county owns is being shared now much more than it used to be. And just, I take the light rail, it doesn't have a ton of passengers, and I heard before the pandemic it had many more passengers. So I guess I can second just that sentiment and that concern as an urban planning student from some years ago, and with that interest, it certainly seems to me like one of the greatest challenges, the idea that maybe downtowns become less important. And it is true that if we can achieve, if it's not kind of the high urban core development, compact development, and I would just just throw out there like a lot of European cities have, that's pretty compact without having very many tall buildings, can still achieve a lot of walkability and bikeability. And as we approach our vehicle miles traveled reduction strategies, a lot of our work is going to be identifying across the county, where do neighborhood centers exist and how can we make them better? How can we make it so that more people want to live in these neighborhood centers, not downtowns necessarily, but make more compact, complete communities, and try to capture population more evenly across the county, as opposed to as highly concentrated as it is now. So I guess perhaps that's a little bit conceptual. Our VMT reduction goals will really try to, I think, push policy in that direction. But as far as how do we take the space that's no longer occupied in a lot of areas, I don't think I have any bright responses probably to that part of it, just a similar concern.
Well, I guess just one other follow-up. So I've been spending a little bit of time, and I'm currently on this call from southern Arizona, south of Tucson. And so we've just been having sort of the remnants of the river storms going through California. It's been raining here like crazy, and we first got here, couldn't figure out why we had driving over bridges with all these river names on them, and there's nothing there but dirt.
Wow.
And now even in this area, there's all kinds of roads that have been blocked just in the last few days. And I know in California, they're trying to figure out how to capture some of the water rather than just running it off in these big cement chutes. So again, it's just a general comment about with climate change and the severity of the storms, it seems like there's a whole new kind of dark cloud that we have to deal with hanging over all of us in terms of dealing with this. And I guess one last story, and you probably read about it a little bit. Yeah. It's a Scottsdale suburb, which is a suburb of Phoenix. with the drying up of the Colorado River and Arizona being so lax in their laws to get people to conserve. This one community, I don't know, several thousand homes got their water supply cut off. And part of the loophole, and again, this didn't show up initially, but developers, as they started going further and further out, they would build these residential neighborhoods, and they didn't have to do anything dealing with where the water was going to come from. And so I guess there's some law in the state that says development they have to plan for 100-year supply of water. And the developers have found ways to get around that. And as a consequence, there are communities now that are, just the local story, they're talking about spending $1,000 a month for water.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So, but the point being is some of these things creep up behind us and we're not necessarily looking at them. And we that live in the land of all the lakes and waters, we're going to have coming battles on who gets all of that. And anyway, I'll stop. I'm just sort of comment on the general state of things. Good comments, presentation by both of you, by the way.
I appreciate that, and thanks for those comments, Tom. Yeah, it's kind of hard to stay bright when a lot of these things start piling up. So I think the best thing is, I think, to kind of these convenings and talking about this stuff together and figuring out how to get more closely connected to those around you and your neighborhoods and folks that need more assistance. Anytime I spend too much time in the office and then I finally get out in the community and meet people who I wouldn't have thought cared about climate change and are very involved and active in it, that's always the brightest part of the day, for sure. And there was a comment that was made earlier just about hey, maybe we should get an electric vehicle for the watershed district. I was just going to point out, with the Inflation Reduction Act and this sea of money, a lot of money, and it's hard to keep track of. You might already know, but in case you don't, a lot of tax credits will be coming down to that will become relevant to non-tax-paying entities. And so, private tax-paying organizations that only used to be able to get those tax credits, now as local governments, state government, nonprofit organizations can get those same credits. And so that will become very interesting for any equipment that you would purchase that would reduce emissions: an electric vehicle, an energy efficiency improvement, solar panels. You will have many credits availed to you with the new Inflation Reduction Act legislation.
President Ziegler.
Yes.
I have thousands of questions, but I think I can do a lot of them if I just gave Karen a call and talked to her a call, if I could come down and visit you. My first one is actually the only real question I would like to have here in this discussion, because we're going to be updating our 10-year plan now. We're looking at ecosystems health assessment plan, putting that together, which is going to be similar to a climate action plan, but it'll look more holistically at the watershed. My question is the barriers that you're encountering, so for instance, Pioneer Sarah, where the initial project you showed was done, that's a watershed management organization. So there aren't rules that you had to, you were provided more flexibility to do something. Have you run into situations like that where you're like, okay, so we have this, maybe it's a nonprofit organization that is working with at-risk communities that wants to do something, but the finances of complying with rules get in their way, so that you have found that a way that you could step in and work with that group. And that's for either of you, but Karen, I think I'm thinking of you specifically if you encounter that.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Right.
Yeah, it definitely isn't easy, and it factors into both of the project example I showed, and the one related to the horse boarding facility, and the kind of the other one, the planning project. So the Pioneer Sarah Commission does have rules, actually. So the approach that we have taken is that in that watershed in particular, the watershed has some grant money, some capital money, and the park district has a lot of interest in that area. And so as partners who are all very kind of have aligned goals on the water quality improvements we're trying to take, we have, when there are big strategic projects like that, taken an approach of we are willing to invest in advancing projects that may or may not ever occur, remember, because these are on private property, like it's a gamble. If the end result will go above and beyond the permit requirements, and then we like the amount that the individual private landowner needs to contribute to it, assuming that we're getting sufficient benefit. And like that's a really fuzzy term, like we haven't defined it. It's kind of just like case by case, like we take a step back and say like, okay, we think this is good enough. So it's really kind of like ends up being a contract negotiation, and each one ends up being structured completely differently so far, and it probably isn't super sustainable, and we know that.
So yet you've actually segued nicely into what my other big question is, and maybe it's something, if you know enough people that are dealing with this, if we could get a group together to start thinking about it, it's we like our rules to have these bright lines, you know, it is X or it is Y, but the truth of the matter is a number of the benefits, the ancillary benefits, cannot be quantified in that same way that stormwater treatment can be, you know. So you have to somehow think that, you know, if we protect these trees, well, what's that benefit? So we don't have an answer. It's something we're thinking about now. And I was hoping you have the bullet, but it sounds like you do.
We don't have a great answer for it either, but would love to talk about it more. Like one of the things we are working on is trying to, we're never going to be able to totally quantify all of those benefits, like, and make it actually like what it would cost to do that would be like astronomical. But I do think we can do better quantifying some of those benefits some of the time, and then maybe use some of those projects as benchmarks to help us understand where like another project falls within the spectrum. Does that make sense? Like that's one of the things that we kind of use to help evaluate like habitat protection projects too, is like, okay, so we're not going to quantify benefits on each and every single project because it's a tremendous task, but we know that this project is pretty similar to this other one that we did quantify, and that was a yes. So like, because it's related to that and we can demonstrate it similar in certain ways, we can kind of say it's a yes without spending all the effort, administrative time, money to like do that. So that's one kind of approach that we're toying with a little bit, but definitely, yeah, I think there could be a lot of benefit from a lot of people getting together to talk about this and figure out some ways to do it.
Yeah, because I would also like to get connected with the forestry department. I mean, there are a number of things, and we'll give Amy Bockham the kudos for the gravel bed trees. That was her.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So, and then one last thing, Eric, I don't know if you're tied into the transportation department at all. I assume you are. I'm an cyclist. I bike everywhere. The biggest barrier to me is not bike lanes. I don't, whatever, I'll bike whatever traffic is there. It's storage of the bike when I get to that place. Has anybody ever thought about like what Amsterdam does, where there's mini garages that you can actually, you know, when you get to US Bank Stadium, there's actually a garage that you can put your bike into and lock it and take the key away. That is the barrier that I see.
Yeah, my first day at work, I went to the government center and I tried to lock my bike and I didn't want to lock it outside. I brought it inside. Security guard said that you can't bring that inside. Go use the lock outside, but it's going to get stolen probably. So that's what I did. And it didn't get stolen, but it didn't feel good. They do have bike lockers out there. So yeah, there are some bike lockers that are operated in some key locations. There's not a lot of them. The county doesn't own a ton of property. As far as like, I think that type of initiative would be much more on a, unfortunately, probably with cities. Though maybe some of our, work on like the light rail projects, maybe there's an opportunity to consider things like that. Minneapolis is doing a lot to spread this concept of mobility hubs, trying to make these, safe, complete, accessible locations that you can access many mobility options. And I mean, I think that's the closest that it's coming to right now, is they are trying to really enhance mobility locations, but I still haven't seen, I think most of them don't have bike lockers at them. So I would just say, yeah, that is a barrier that I witness as well, and I've experienced as well. And I love that idea generally.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. If anybody else has questions, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, I'll have to get going here in a moment, but I had seen Marilyn's hand up, I guess.
Hi, I just wanted to, Terry, if you could share that soft landings link. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept. So when I hear people talk about planting trees for climate sustainability, I think of what typically happens, and it's a ginkgo tree, and it's got this mound of mulch by it and surrounded by acres of turf grass, and it's just, and the life of an urban tree is cut so short because of that treatment, whereas this soft landing concept is to get a keystone, a native keystone species that supports a lot of insects, which in turn supports birds and frogs and amphibians, and then under the drip line put native plants. It's going to sequester more carbon, it's going to support biodiversity. And I just see so many, I think Manager Cook mentioned about the roadsides and even between roads, you get your north, south, east, west, and that green, whole green kind of bioswale in between, and it's always mowed turf grass. And how much carbon could we be sequestering if we had a short meadow there, short prairie? So I hope that some of these best management practices can be handed down to cities who are designing these areas.
Mr. President,
Manager Cook?
I have just one question for our guests. And does Hennepin County have any groundwater initiatives? And I ask that because groundwater, it's going to be a significant issue, and I know it doesn't seem like it when you've got 28 inches of snow, but we've had a drought now for several years, and according to I believe I don't know whether it's NOAA or whoever, their map projects that St. Louis will have Phoenix weather, I believe, by the end of the century, and that we'll end up with something like Kansas City weather by the end of the century. So it won't necessarily be as wet as what we've thought it is, but it hasn't been that way. Does Hennepin have a groundwater policy, or are they getting everything out of the Mississippi River?
We don't do much on groundwater. So we have in the 80s, someone had drafted and tried to advance a countywide groundwater plan, and it met resistance and was shelved and never happened. One of the items in our climate action plan is to try to revive the idea of having a groundwater plan. So it's something we expect to be kind of engaging partners on, like, is there utility to this? Like, will you work on this with us over the next several years? All but a very small part of Hennepin County is incorporated, so we don't operate any, there aren't any water supply sorts of things that we do. Minneapolis takes their water from the Mississippi, and Minneapolis provides water to some of the kind of first ring suburbs, and most other communities are on wells. It is a big concern both from a water supply perspective as well as from well, in the northwestern or eastern part of our county. We've got sandy soils up there, so there's like groundwater contamination concerns. And in a lot of parts of our county, we have a very shallow water table, and groundwater flooding is also something that we're quite concerned about, which is a whole other animal in terms of types of flooding and understanding risks and responses. So it is something that we're really concerned about, but we've done very, very little related to groundwater so far.
Well, thank you. I just mentioned, because I know that was one of the things we have on our plan, I believe it is formally, and something that is a concern out in our part of the Hennepin County, maybe not so much Hennepin. We actually have Carver County might be a big one, but we have a lot of wells, and I think that's going to be an issue in the future. And I mention that because then involved being spending some time in Arizona. Phoenix has a huge problem with their aquifer, and that's why a lot of these cities are running out of water in that area. But that's enough. Thank you again very much for your participation. Thank you.
I was just gonna
Yes.
make a quick note that I was just spending some time, Maryland, looking up the soft landing aspects and really enjoy that. And you sounded like you and I are both Doug Tallamy acolytes. In Cedar Rapids, when I had a yard, it was all keystone species, and I have an apartment now, so I have to go find those elsewhere. But I loved your comment, and really like that idea. But I'll have to take off here in just a moment. So I really enjoyed being here with everybody.
Well, you can come plant my yard, Eric.
What'd you say?
You can come plant my yard. I'm in the Willard Hay neighborhood.
Okay. I request guaranteed access anytime. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks a
Yes.
lot, everyone.
Yeah, thanks,
you.
everybody.
Nice
Okay,
job,
we have-
Karen. Thanks, Terry. See you, everybody. Bye-bye.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have other things on our agenda. The next one is project discussion.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate you being here. Managers.
Thank you too. I'm going to take off as well as you're moving on to your agenda, but thank you so much for having us. Really, really good to spend some time with you all and
Yeah, I'm gonna
identify
Thank you,
these
Karen.
opportunities.
Bye tomorrow.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, managers. What I would like to do is go through, we've had some conversations with different partners or potential partners about projects that we could do. I would like to go through those in anticipation of a scope, a work order being put forward at the February meeting. So I'm going to pull up a slideshow presentation, go through them, and then at the same time, I also just want to talk about quickly go through some of the other projects and the status of where they're at right now. So 1 second here. All right, share screen. Okay. So, all right. And everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Well, now I can't find my other half. Let's hope it lets me. There we go. All right. So the first one I talk about, and Manager Cook should be intimately familiar with this site, and this is the Carver Beach Park. It's on the west side of Lotus Lake. It is a park, an active park that has not as much riprap as it actually has a retaining wall. Most of these boulders are 24 to 36 inches in size. If you look over to the right here, you can see where some of those boulders have fallen in. They're also falling away here. What you can't see from this photograph is there's a 12 to 18 inch gap behind the rocks all along through the shoreline. So I had a conversation with Jerry Rugmer, who is the Parks Director for the city of Chanhassen, and Adam Beers, who is the Parks Facilities Superintendent about if they would let us come in here and restore this using bioengineering techniques. There are several reasons why this would be beneficial. And here's just another view of it. You can see the rocks falling off here, that gap. Several reasons why this would be beneficial. First is the obvious resource protection. We would be able to put in a small buffer. We would be able to put bioengineering along the shoreline, stabilize it. The second reason, though, I would like to be able to do something like this is a demonstration project. I mean, we hear so often from people that riprap is the only solution. That's what my landscaper tells me is the only thing I can do. It would give us an opportunity to install a bioengineered solution that is better for the habitat, better for resource protection, better for shoreline stabilization, and still meets the requirements of not losing shoreline. So what we would look at doing, and we would have to, do the design itself, but this photograph right here that you're seeing, this was the Middle Riley Creek. These are VRSSs, which are really soil lifts wrapped within burlap sacks, and then they can be planted directly into it. So this was right after installation. If you look in this, you can see here, there's also some along here, and then over here, they've been used. They can tolerate the scour forces of a stream. They will be able to tolerate wave action. So just a diagram of what it looked like on that project. So what you're seeing here is these are usually willow fascines that are placed in between each lift to grow. You can plant into it. You plant whatever you want. So we would need to work with the city to keep their aesthetic of the park or their usability of the park, but it would give us a chance to get a little buffer along the shoreline, stabilize that shoreline, and have a demonstration education project. So before I move on from that, if you guys want to ask questions either at the end of this or in it, however you want to do that.
Mr. President.
Manager Cook?
Yes. Well, first of all, based upon engineering study that was done on Lotus Lake, I would have to see another engineering study that would demonstrate that this, what would be proposed would withstand the force of wake boats. Based on the prior engineering study, unless you basically have almost all rock, it's not going to withstand it. That is a particularly narrow area, some maybe 500 feet, I'm guessing, etc. And quite frankly, what needs to be done on Lotus Lake is Chanhassen needs to restrict the use of wake boats. I see no reason, unless you can show me with an engineering study that I can have validated, why we should be spending money trying to fix this other than with hard armoring it with riprap. Now, I agree that this is has the effect of more of a retaining wall, but if you're familiar with wake boats, the wake is like a tsunami wave. It goes along the bottom, goes up the rocks, crashes over the back, and washes out from behind. And that's exactly what happened here at this location. This was caused primarily by the action of wake boats. The only other thing that can happen is that sometimes the ice, can destabilize the bottom because it is so vertical that it can get shifted out. But before we go down this path, we would need a lot of engineering. And I am not inclined, as I said before, to spend a lot of money on something that I think is bound for failure at this narrow junction. That whole part from the park on north is just way too narrow. The studies are, well, you can go to the study done by the university. There's a study done in Wisconsin. There's a study done in Australia. And it takes over 700 feet for these waves to dissipate to what a normal, boat would do. So I think before we even look at considering this, we need to have a lot of engineering done and a lot of studies being done.
President Ziegler, Manager Cook. First of all, that installation of riprap was not done properly to begin with. So secondly, it was failing in 2006 when I started at Chanhassen. But more importantly, when this system is put in, there is fabric that is wrapped back from the shoreline that will accommodate the waves that go over the top, something that does not happen with riprap. And then finally, again, it is able to tolerate the scours in a stream. It can tolerate waves.
Well, I'll just add, if you give me the engineering studies, and we can look at it. The power of a wake boat weight exceeds that of the streams. The calculations are there. So, you want to come up with other calculations, I can have them reviewed by another engineer. We need to think long and hard before we do this. What really needs to happen is for Chanhassen to limit those wake boats. And riprap all has to have fabric barrier. Can't put in riprap anymore without fabric barriers. And it still goes up and over and behind. So I think we need a lot of work and a lot of study before we move forward with that.
President Ziegler, I just have a quick question. Terry, who is the engineer that did the drawing that we're looking at?
Bar.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm trying to assist the president of the Christmas Lake Association come up with something as a demo project as well. And we are willing to give it a shot, but we're just having trouble finding an engineer that really has thought about how this thing could actually work with wakeboards. I think Manager Cook's got some good points there.
All right. The next item I'd like to talk about is the Lake Susan pond reuse. So we came to you last year, we were going to retain Peterson to go out and troubleshoot the system. Engineer Soviak and I had a discussion about it and decided that rather than throw good money after bad, we might want to reconsider how we approach the intake. So what you're seeing here is the schematic of it. This area right here is the pump itself. And then the intake has to go out into Lake Susan or into Lake Susan Park Pond, roughly 75 feet. And so here it is looking at it profile section. This is the shoreline. It follows the pond contour down, and then when it hits that normal water level, that's where it comes out and extends. So if you look at this, this is station 0 plus 0, 0, station 0 plus 50 feet, station 0 plus 75 feet. So what we are almost certain is happening is with the 4-inch diameter PVC pipe and the sag that occurs from it going out there, it's losing its prime. So what we would like to come to the board with instead of spending the money that we were going to spend with Peterson is to design it so that rather than having the intake go out here, we would actually install a manhole back in this area that the intake would be from the manhole, so that it wouldn't have to have that 75 feet of pipe and the 4-inch diameter that would lose prime. So that is the thought with this project.
Mr. President,
Manager Cook.
a couple of questions. So do I understand you correct? You're saying that the pump is losing its prime and therefore it's not being able to draw the water and then pump it through the, whatever we got, sand filter. Is that the issue here?
That's correct. That is correct.
Well, in addition to that, have we, I'd like to see, are there other alternatives? I mean, are there better pumps? Are there self-priming pumps? I happen to have done a lot of work with, well, it's now GE Water, but it was a local company. I mean, basically, they were in the pumps and all kinds of industrial purpose pumps, wastewater pumps, et cetera. So I'd like to see some comparison of, alternatives. And then my last question is what you're saying is you would put a manhole in there, and then how are you going to get the water to the manhole if the water level's low?
Engineer Sobiak, if you take a moment and just explain how this system would work, please.
Thank you, Terry. So the idea would be, rather than having to install every spring and uninstall this floating pipe that goes out into the pond, there would be either concrete or ductile iron pipe that would go out into the pond. Water would gravity flow through that pipe into this manhole structure. And the pipe would be set low enough to handle low waters, as low as what we would have it set for the pump to operate currently. So we'd always have water in the manhole. Then the pumps would be able to draw the water from the manhole up to the pump station. It also provides the benefit of reducing the length that the pump has to draw through the pipe, which reduces the head, which should also help the pump efficiency.
Mr. President, can I continue?
Manager Cook, yes.
So you're going to put the basically the inlet head down into that the concrete pipe, and are you going to be able to leave it there, or what am I missing here?
The inlet would stay in the pond permanently, and that would be connect up to this manhole, correct?
So the pipe and the pump was going to stay in that culvert, and then what are you going to do? Pump out it's not a culvert, it's a concrete pipe. You're going to pump that out every fall then and shut it off? So
the pump itself sits up in a building up at the top of the hill.
Yep, I understand that.
The manhole would contain water in it all the time. It would not be pumped dry.
Well, what I'm trying to ask is, as I understood it, one of the issues here was the fact that you got to pull this thing in the fall. Are you still going to have to pull the, it's not the pump head, but it's the inlet there on the pipes? Are you still going to have to pull that in the fall, or is there some other mechanism that as part of this concrete pipe that it would eliminate?
There are a couple of different options to handle that we'd want to vet through. If the pipe and the structure is deep enough, it would be kept warm enough that it wouldn't freeze. If we can't get it deep enough, then we may have to have that one pipe section pulled. It's something we need to work through as we work through the design of a manhole structure.
Well, my only thought is that I think you need to look at all of the potential options, all the way from different pump design, self-priming pumps. If we eliminate problems, eliminate them. So, I guess this comes back. I'd want to basically fund a task order to find out what the best solution is. So that's all I have on this at this time.
Anybody else? Okay. The next task order that we would like to bring to you at the next meeting is the Duck Lake outlet. So we have met with the Duck Lake Association, or a couple of the president and Rod Fisher, Maya Santamaria and Rod Fisher went through a couple of the three scenarios. One being leave it as is, The second being, so if you remember from the original, so I'll just quick go back. Here is the original structure that was put in 1969. The city wanted to basically cut the front out of it. Whoops, sorry. And somebody kind of did that anyway. Then they did not change the elevation from this, but they put in a much more efficient outlet. There are three options would be to leave this outlet as it is in place, to try and go through the permitting process to raise the outlet, which we've had several conversations with the DNR, and that is a non-starter. And then the third one would be, and this is the one that we have landed upon in discussions with the association, as well as I just had a conversation with Robert Ellis from the city of Eden Prairie today, whereby we would change the hydraulics or the hydraulic condition of the outlet. So basically restrict that outlet so that it would mimic the conditions that were there prior to this. So we don't have to change the outflow elevation, and it's the change of the outflow elevation that triggers the issues with the DNR permit. We would still have to go through the DNR permitting, and there's no guarantee, that they would say rubber stamp this, but they were favorable to this when we talked about it. In discussions with Eden Prairie, what I had said to them is we would do the design work if they would do the construction of it, and they agreed to that. So that is what we'd like to bring forward to you at the February meeting, is for BAR to do the design for this outlet.
So I have one question. I know from the original design to the current design, we lost about 41 cubic yards of stormwater storage. Do we know, or at least from the engineering standpoint, will BAR engineer get us back that flood storage?
That will not, President Ziegler, that will not return because we cannot change the outflow elevation. What it will do is the bounce will last longer so that it will draw down slower, in essence.
Well, Mr. President,
Manager Cook?
I certainly can appreciate people wanting to have a level back to what they think it was. I just don't like going about this. It seems to me to be, let me say, a dishonest way to try to get something that really isn't permissible. And we're doing something to restrict it. So we're going to be changing the other thing is we're going to be changing, what do you call it? The undulation, or what's the term for
The bounce.
the bounce, of this. I don't know exactly why the DNR has, an issue on it, but for them to go basically in a backhanded way, do the same thing, that bothers me. I don't think that's the way government should be operating. So those are my comments.
So,
but just to be sure, I mean, I'm in total understanding of wanting to get it back. And I don't understand why DNR isn't allowing to have it go back to what it was unless it wasn't there. But, doing it a backhanded way, I don't think that's the way to operate, quite frankly.
any other questions on it?
Not at this time.
Okay. Just a quick update on the Upper Riley Creek project. I'll try and fumble through it, Scott, but please correct me if I get things wrong. So we currently need to have, we need to get to a point where we can get a no-rise certificate on the floodplain of this creek. BAR has been working on the design and the modeling to do that. Until we get that dialed in, we cannot get the core permit to proceed with this. The EAW.
Excuse me, Mr. President, could you have Mr. Jeffrey just explain what is the no rise thing?
I'm sorry?
What's that? What's the concept of the no rise certificate? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Engineer Sullivan, could you explain no rise certificates and how it applies on this project?
President Ziegler, Manager Cook. A no-rise certificate originates from the DNR and from FEMA. What it is because this portion of Riley Creek has what's called a detailed hydraulic study that was done by FEMA's contractors back in the 70s. They have maps that have elevations listed on them. If you do a project within an area that FEMA has mapped with elevations, you need to demonstrate that your project will not change elevations. That's a no-rise certificate.
Okay.
Alternatively, if your project does result in changes in elevations, FEMA then requires the cities, who are the floodplain managers, to require a conditional letter of map revision, which is, hey, we're going to do this project, we're going to change these elevations, and when we're done, we're also going to change FEMA's map. So that's a whole nother process that we're trying to avoid, changing FEMA's maps by trying to get to this no rise condition.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mr. President,
Yes, Manager Duval.
just to follow up on that. Scott, could he explain what the rise is, period?
The rise has to do with an increase in flood elevation. The current modeling that we've done from existing conditions to proposed conditions, some of the areas have shown upwards of almost 1.5 feet increase with the project, or 1.5 feet rise. So we're modifying the project itself to bring that down to get back to a zero, a no rise, a no increase in flood elevation.
Okay, so I just know from my real estate days that mortgage companies and title insurance companies, they're all concerned about the FEMA flood zones, and they're becoming more prevalent everywhere in the country. So I'm presuming it relates to that somewhat.
Absolutely. It ties back to those flood insurance rate maps that all realtors and banks use for anybody who has a federally backed mortgage to see if you need flood insurance.
Okay.
And flood
got it.
insurance rates are in the process of increasing quite a bit with the new legislation that just came through.
Everywhere.
Correct.
There's a significantly longer background we could get into. In, what was it, 2005, the DNR went through Hennepin, the 7-county metro area, basically it updated all the FEMA maps and went through the whole LOMA process. Carver County opted not to participate in that process. So that's why we're relying on the 1970 elevation and other places. I'm actually was surprised they had elevations for this area. So anyway, so we're working through that. So that has delayed our schedule somewhat. We're still proceeding with the plans. Like Scott just said, Engineer Solvik just said, they're updating the plans to try and accommodate this no rise. Councilman Welch is putting together a draft of the cooperative agreement right now. We've been in conversations with the city of Chanhassen on it, so we can keep moving forward with that as we go through. What we anticipate, again, as I said earlier, we can't go get any of the permits we need until we resolve this, the flood rise, the no rise certificate issue. Then we'll get the core permit, any other permits we need. We're probably looking at going out for bid July, August, bid opening September, October, and then being able to give a notice to proceed October, probably to begin on the project. That's what we're hoping to go forward with.
Mr. President,
Manager Cook.
if I could just ask a question. Now, yeah. Am I correct that this Upper Riley Creek, that's what flows into Susan and the
That is-
Susan Pond? Is that
That is,
correct?
that is correct. That's what flows into Lake Susan. Yep.
So would whatever work ends up getting done in Riley Creek, and I assume that one of the goals would be to improve the water quality in Susan and the pond?
In Susan, for sure. The pond, it probably won't have much impact on the pond.
Well,
It is-
I just asked the question, I probably know the answer as to whether or not it makes sense to spend a lot of money on the Lake Susan issue until this Upper Riley, we know what's gonna happen to Upper Riley Creek. I know it's kind of unrelated, it's a question of whether the pump works at all, but I just, question pops into my head. And I would like that to be addressed. If it's not related, had no impact, but that's a question I have about the relationship between those two projects.
Yeah, the Lake Susan Park Pond, it's just another, from the UAA, it's just another aspect of the watershed work to contribute to the improved water quality of Lake Susan. One of the other things we want to get is the corings of the wetland to the south of Lake Susan, which we suspect is a contributor of phosphorus. Unfortunately, the water levels were down so much we couldn't get in there to get those corings. We're hoping we'll get those in the spring and can look at the release rates there. So, and then just a quick kind of rundown of other initiatives and projects. The one that are in the peach color are projects that are upcoming or forthcoming or potentially will happen. So, we're looking at the Bluff Creek, the Headwaters Wetland Restoration Area, as well as the Reach B5 stabilization, which is that reach from Galpin Boulevard to Highway 5. So that'll move forward to 24. We'll start looking at that, doing that. Lotus Lake watershed improvement. We've had meetings with the city of Chanhassen about looking at regional stormwater throughout there. We're looking at North Lotus Lake Park right now and doing some type of a stormwater park. We'll be meeting with Jen Keeler from BAR, who is the project manager, looking at concept designs for that next week, I believe, Scott. So I hope shortly, maybe at the February workshop, I'll have something a little more concrete to bring to you, concept plans at least. The Purgatory Recreation Area berm, that is where currently Staff Maxwell goes and electrofishes. The trail is washed out. Right now, it's just a series of 2x12s, basically, connecting. In my conversation today with the city of Eden Prairie, told them we don't have the capacity at this time to manage the project. We do have money put aside in our CIP to assist with it. He was going to go talk to their parks department and see if they have the capacity to manage the project, which would be really helpful. And then we would just partner with their project. So just talked about the Lake Susan Preserve wetland. We need to get the coring down there. That'll determine what, if any, management practices come out of that. We've got the ongoing in-lake management alum. As long as I'm on this, to your question about being over on Lake Riley, Manager Cook looked into it. What it is the BAR invoice, all of their alum treatments go into that same category. So it just didn't get separated out in ours. So we're not over on it. It's just not needed out between the three different areas that would be associated with that. Ongoing lake vegetation management. One of the things we actually were banting about today is if we want to, and this is really in the infancy stages, but Starring Lake's response to the fluoridone treatment was good. I say that because there is not much vegetation right now, and it might be an opportunity for us to actually work in a situation where we could introduce native vegetation, unlike Lake Susan when they tried to do it, which was, really trying to plant into existing aquatic vegetation, and it just lost the early pondweed. Whereas this might be an opportunity, but it was really just kind of in our discussion. At this point, we don't have anything set in stone with it. Environmental health assessment plan, EHAP, this is Jill's baby. This is the one where we were talking about really looking at a holistic approach to this. This would be where climate resiliency, soil health, ecosystem services, ecological protection, all of the other elements that we're doing, and then doing a standalone plans, wetland assessment program, that surface water, groundwater interaction, really trying to pull it into an encompassing plan that we can work from. We're having the Lake Association Summit in February 21st, I want to say. So we'll continue working with them, talking about lake management plans. It would be nice if we could find one group at least to do a whole lake management plan. And then the 4 projects in blue are just ones that, they're dormant right now. We're finishing them up. Silver Lake Water Quality Project. All of these are just in the vegetation maintenance phase right now. So that's all I have.
Mr. President,
Manager Cook.
I wonder if we could get, I've mentioned this before, but sooner rather than later, if we could get at least a preliminary report on where we stand as far as the 10-year plan is concerned, just where we're at, today. Not where we think we're going to go or doing the changes, just so we can get an idea. Okay, these past 5 years or whatever it is, just find out where this is what we've done, this wasn't what we haven't done, and this is where we're going to go, and make sure that whatever we're talking about either fits in the 10-year plan or change the 10-year plan. I just get a little lost as to, are we following the 10-year plan? I'm going to assume we are, but we know what assume means.
President Ziegler, Manager Cook, I think it'd be easily doable just to take the implementation tables from it and just go through, add another column, the status of where they're at. Yep, I can do that.
That would work for me. I think that'd be a good place to start.
Yep, absolutely, I can do that. That's not a problem at all. I'll pull that together. All right.
Okay, any other discussion items? We can't vote or give any instruction at this time, but yeah. Anybody else have questions, comments?
Just make a comment that in regard to Manager Cook's comment about how it ties into the 10-year plan. I think that sounds like a great idea. If we could see that in one of the reports.
So, Mr. President,
Manager Cook?
barring any other business, I will move to adjourn.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? It looks like we lost our person for Terry. Can you do a roll call vote for us, please?
Absolutely. Manager Crafton,
Yes.
Manager DeVal,
Yes.
Manager Cook.
Yes, but I want to add, this was very informative. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. Manager Pedersen,
Yes.
President Ziegler.
Yes.
Believe that's 5-0. Thank you all. I
Thank you.
appreciate your time
Thank you.
tonight.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
everyone. Take care.
I will get those slide decks to everybody, both mine and the Hennepin County.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.